Let's move on to our next panelist. Journalism is under attack, and she knows what that means because she's been in journalism for nearly all her life. She's an editor at the BBC. She took over in January the head position of news at BBC World News. Before that, she worked in Singapore and led there the bureau of the BBC in Asia. She also led the Asian digital team of the BBC. Prior to that, she worked in London, where she did domestic news and also served as a producer of one of the most, or the most prestigious journalistic formats and news programs at night. She also is a head, or served as a head for the BBC Reality Check platform. So she did fact-checking, which is more than needed in times like these. Please welcome her, give her a big hand. Welcome, Liz Corbin. Hi.
Hi, thank you very much.
Just sit over here.
Thank you. Hi.
Liz, these are unusual times for journalists. We have to talk about what's going on in this world. Journalism is under attack. Financially, politically, technically. So what is the take of the BBC these days? How to cope with all those problems? How can we make journalism great again?
Is this microphone working? It is, great. I think attack is a very strong word. And I think I prefer to look at it as a challenge. Yes, financially, yes, politically, and yes, technologically. There are all a whole load of challenges coming together all at one time. But it's actually also a really exciting time to be working in journalism. We know that people now are more interested in the news than they've ever been. And that's a good thing. We want people to be interested in the news, be interested in the world around them. They also have more opportunity to access information than they've ever had before, and that is where the challenge comes in.
When you say the people are more interested in the news, we must differentiate, because news are not news, and we need to talk about this. And there's so much fake news out there, so people get completely lost. How do you explain what's going on these days, and what could be the role of BBC or the German public television or news formats for that matter?
Yes, there certainly is a massive, unending range of places where people can now get their information. And it's crucial for us as what have been traditional broadcasters to be active and creative in that space. We can no longer pump out television and radio and just kind of hope that people will come to it. We need to be producing news in the places that people are. We need to go to people, and we need to be producing it in a way that they want to engage with it. They can now interact with the news. Previously, we stood here with a microphone and told them what the news was. It's now absolutely imperative on us to show them what the news is, to prove things. People can get their facts from wherever they want, and so we need to be able to prove ourselves in terms of how trustworthy we are and how accurate we are.
Excuse me? Okay, I'm just looking at my timer here. Sorry about that.
It wasn't a stunt.
We just met Alex.
Yes.
And Alex came from the traditional media, now works for BuzzFeed, and he described in a very appealing way, I think, how BuzzFeed learned to do like the real serious heavy lifting of journalism. On the contrary, while they learn how to do like the really serious journalism, do we as traditional media learn how to do cat videos?
Cat videos less so for the BBC, unless there's a really strong editorial reason to do one. But you notice it was absolutely great hearing that presentation, because not least because he referenced one of the investigations that we did together. And I think that collaboration between different news organisations has been something that's been really exciting, that's been happening over the last few years. And there's certainly things that the BBC has to offer in terms of global reach and the resource that we have. We have more journalists across the world in more places than any other news broadcaster. So we certainly have that. We broadcast in 42 different languages. I would love to have known about that before I came, because I'd like to know how many languages that report got translated into, because it would have been many, I'm sure. So reaching people in the actual language they want to speak in, or talking in a way and covering stories that attract them. You know, we have a public service remit as well, in terms of reaching all audiences. I think in the past, all broadcasters have had been in a situation where we haven't known a huge amount about who our audience is and how they are interacting with our content. Now we have more data than ever before, and how we use that data to make sure that we are reaching more women, more under 35-year-olds, people from different communities. It's absolutely crucial to our public service remit to be able to reach all of those people.
But that is something fairly new, right? I mean, like the audience was always there, right?
They were always there, but we didn't know as much about them as we do now, and I think that's what's crucial.
Getting to know your audience, that might be the first step for like the traditional media outlets. So you were pointing out also that you were, also addressing young audiences.
Yeah.
How do you make news sexy for young audiences? Because you're doing quite a lot in that field.
I think there's also there has been in the past, and certainly isn't in the BBC now. There's a massive focus at the BBC now in reaching more younger audiences, and a lot of that is to do with story choice. What is the news? The news to you may be different to the news to me, will certainly be very different to the news to somebody in India or in Kenya or in Brazil. You know, all those are really important to know what is important to the audience and what they need to know about the world that's around them. And we do that by having a more diverse newsroom, and that's really crucial. I think newsrooms everywhere can look at who is in them, and making sure that we're representative there. We're making great strides in that regard, and really getting an interaction with the audience to understand what they want from us.
All right. So the newsrooms have to change. They have to become more diverse. You have to get to learn your audience. How important is it to personalize news in the future?
Yeah, I mean that's a key. When you said a technological attack, that's a technological opportunity. The news is, people say the news is the news. Well, it depends where you are and who you are, what you find important and what you want to engage with. And an ability to personalise is really, really important. Many of you will know that the BBC News website, bbc.com/news, looks different depending on where in the world you are. It will look different in the UK to it looks in Europe, to in Asia, to North America. And that's because we accept that different audiences want different things from the news. I think the other thing that many people don't realise that a news organisation like the BBC can do is to outreach. So we have a now global media literacy programme aimed at 11 to 18-year-olds. This is something that public service media can do that is harder in the commercial world. We do it. We have both commercial and public service within the BBC. And we've got a project coming up at the season this autumn called Beyond Fake News, which media literacy is one part of.
Reaching out is meaning you go and visit schools.
Go and visit schools. Yeah,
okay.
Our journalists go into schools, and in multiple. For instance, in India, we've gone to 7 different regions of India. We have multiple languages there, and we're delivering media literacy programs in those languages to those young people.
Especially in these countries, and we've all heard about what's been going on with Facebook in India, and so what is the danger that we're all facing if people are not literate enough to understand news and how it's actually made?
As part of this Beyond Fake News season, we're working with WhatsApp in particular in India, also with Google and Twitter, but with WhatsApp, 25 people have been murdered in India this year due to fake news rumors on WhatsApp or chat.
Because they're basically getting all their news just from these platforms.
Well, perhaps not all of their news, but they're certainly getting a certain amount of content via chat apps. I hesitate to call it news because it's not news. It's not true. It's disinformation, and it's dangerous. This is real life. Okay, it's not just something you share on social media. People have died.
Talking about the platforms and the responsibility of the platforms, would you say we need to regulate Facebook, Google, YouTube, for that matter, for they have a lot of responsibility these days?
It's not for the BBC to say whether other people should be regulated, but there is a sense now that traditional media, we have to be registered with Ofcom in the UK, and we have to obey, all of the rules that come with that. Our Director General of the BBC recently, along with a range of other news organisations in the UK, did say that perhaps the larger digital players should see some form of independent regulation, that it cannot be just down to media literacy programmes to help audiences and the general public through the amount of content that they can access now.
You're very diplomatic, not demanding on regulation, but doesn't it bother you that you produce with a lot of manpower and women power, you're producing a lot of stuff, doing the hard, heavy lifting journalism, and you appear right next to a, let's say, hate preacher such as Alex Jones, and the people don't differentiate. They just say, I saw it on Facebook, I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, attribution's obviously really key. The BBC is a big name. BuzzFeed's a big name now. Those are brands that people can recognise, and so.
But do they actually? I mean,
yes, but this is when they're seeing that content on other people's platforms, because this is absolutely crucial. It's crucial that our content goes on other platforms. We work with a whole range of different platforms to get our content out there. But attribution is really key. People need to know where this stuff is coming from, and to the point of whether how that content is surfaced, yes, we feel that there should be an onus on digital platforms to make sure that quality news, and particularly public service media, are surfaced ahead of other stuff. I think the key thing, and previous speaker was explaining that, was this stuff is expensive, right? Doing proper journalism is expensive. It needs investing in, it needs protecting, and it is valued. We know it's valued by the audience. So that commitment, whether that's from advertisers or from governments protecting things like the licence fee in the UK, protecting public service media, is going to be really crucial in the future.
But since it's so crucial, as you mentioned, isn't it sad that that the driver's seats, for data, you described how important it is to know your audience. We don't own the data. We don't own the algorithms that decides what people see and what they don't see. Worldwide, Facebook does. They can say, okay, tomorrow it's more cat content, and the day after it's more hard news, or it's even fake news. So, how can we deal with that kind of a power? Have we lost the war on information?
No, I don't think we've lost. I think we're engaging in it, and I think that how we create our content. We create our content in the world and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and we need to create content that will the algorithm can push up. However, I think there is pressure on organisations like Facebook in particular, in terms of how those algorithms work and whether they are supporting the truth. And now they talk very eloquently about all of the efforts they're going in to make sure this happens. Is it happening quick enough is a good question.
I don't want to let you get away with that kind of thing, because you just easily said the world is as it is. Can't we change the world in terms of, there was a proposal here discussed even yesterday. How about like all the European news outlets, publishers, but also like the public broadcasters go together and they develop their own kind of a Facebook or YouTube platform, like all together? What would you say?
If that's what people want to go out and do, that's fantastic. I think at the BBC we're trying all sorts of different things. Launching last week, we launched, or a couple of weeks ago, we launched BBC Real, which is a new website aimed at getting kind of current affairs but non-news video out there and more accessible. We're always experimenting with different ways of reaching the audiences, and we will work with whoever makes sense to work with to do that. I think, as I said, we're working with WhatsApp in India. We're running conferences over a week with them. We're doing the same thing in Kenya. We're also conducting some research alongside Google and Twitter into why people spread disinformation, why they share fake news. And we do need to work with all sorts of different people to get there. But I think also what we need to do is focus on the fundamentals. For nearly 100 years, the BBC has been conducting impartial, accurate journalism, and we must never lose sight of those values, because that is what people come to us for. That is why people value our content. That is why people value our journalism. We have to keep doing that. We have to stick to our values and at the same time innovate and understand the world that we're now working in.
The world definitely has changed around us. Journalists are being attacked. People don't trust us that much anymore as they used to do, the people. Some people hate us, like really to the bones. What do you think is going on these days? How do you explain that tension, that growing tension, not just in the US, but also in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a number of journalists on this continent in Europe killed over the last year. That is completely unacceptable. And at the BBC, at the BBC's Persian service, the BBC has gone to the UN to complain about the treatment of our journalists and their families in Iran. Our journalists face pressure and hostility across the world in many, many different countries. And we have always faced challenges. I think the issue that we have globally with trust in news is something that's very serious, something that we are not resting on our laurels about. We need to address this as the most trusted international news broadcaster. The BBC, particularly feels that and feels that we need to maintain that. Otherwise, what's the point in journalism? We have to be trusted, but we have to earn that trust. And this is what I was saying before. We can't sit here and tell people what the news is anymore. We have to show them. We have to help them through it. We have to guide them. There's so much other stuff out there. We can't ignore it. I think that it's certainly shifted over the last decade, where it used to be that if the BBC were broadcasting it, then it's true. If they're not broadcasting it, there's either not true or it's not worth knowing about. Well, we are living in a much louder, noisier environment now, and we have to tackle things head on. So things like BBC Reality Check are dealing with, they'll take a fake news story and they'll unpick it, and they'll explain why it's always more complicated than you think, and they will they will go through that story, whereas previously, it's an untrue story, we just wouldn't do it. Now, we do it, and we explain to people, why it might not have been how they thought it was. And whether that's from, we cover Brexit in that way quite substantially with BBC Reality Check, through to fake news story from Myanmar. It's important that we tackle these stories head on.
Talking about Brexit, I cannot let you go without talking about Brexit. Who is responsible for Brexit? The British tabloids or the internet?
Or the politicians. Who's responsible? I mean, the referendum was a vote. It was more than 50% of the UK population voted.
There was media involved on the way to the election.
The media reported, and in the UK you have newspapers on the left and the right of centre, and they reported it how they wanted to report it. The BBC reported it impartially. It was an extremely, and continues to be an extremely hostile debate with people right over one side and right over the other. There's a constant question over how you achieve balance in that situation, and we feel that we have continued to do that, and it's something that's topmost in our minds as we cover that story. But I think often, particularly as I travel in Europe, and I've been to Germany, this is my third trip to Germany in the last 2 months, I find that there is disbelief that the public might have chosen Brexit and that they must have been in some way influenced to vote for it. And I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how populations across Europe, not just in the UK, feel about how they are connected to the political elite, to the institutions, to globalization, and how that impacts their lives. And I think until people understand that, then they won't understand why Brexit's happening.
And we all were thinking when the internet started that this would be a tool to spread democracies, to have equal rights everywhere, and the news being delivered and shared liberally, and spreading the good intentions in human mankind. And now we're living in this world. What's your final take on this? How did we get there, and how shall we get out of there?
I think the advent of the way that we share information digitally can still be seen in a very, very positive way. We can reach people that we never reached before. We can talk to people. We can interview people that we would never have reached before. Previously you would, an expensive satellite feed or a trip to go and see that person, that just never would happen. So in that way, kind of democratization in terms of the voices that you can now hear in the news and that audiences can now interact with has massively increased. Of course, with that come immense challenges and huge amount of damage as well. But I think you can see two sides to it.
I love your optimism. Thank you very much, Liz Corbin. Thank you very much for taking the time coming here to Medientage München. Thank you.